Welcome to all of our listeners. This is Jim Roddey, host of the Best of Allegheny County. Every week we meet interesting and successful people who have a connection to our region. The show is presented by St. Barnabas, which has been caring for people in southwestern Pennsylvania since 1900. Today in Allegheny, Beaver, and Butler counties, we offer the full continuum of care, including independent and assisted living, skilled care, memory, dental, and home care, and we also have a full-service medical center. Today we're going to have a very, very interesting and topical discussion. We're going to talk about vaccines, and certainly that's been on a lot of people's mind in these days of the COVID-19. But we're also going to start by talking about a vaccine that was developed years and years ago, back in the 1950s, by Dr. Jonas Salk, who did that work at the University of Pittsburgh, the Graduate School of Public Health. And with us today is Dr. Peter Salk, and he is the son of Jonas Salk, and he is the president of the Jonas Salk Legacy Foundation and practices medicine in La Jolla, California, which is one of the most beautiful spots in the world, I guess. Welcome, Peter, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Jim. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you.
We do share one thing together. When your father developed the vaccine was the year that I got married, and so I'm much, much older than you. And we both have had a connection with the Graduate School of Public Health at the University of Pittsburgh. I've been on that board of visitors for quite a number of years, and of course that was your father's headquarters when he did the remarkable work on polio.
Yeah, actually, neighbors, so to speak. I have a really nice relationship with the Graduate School of Public Health myself over this last decade or more, and I've been on the faculty there, first as a visiting professor and now on a part-time basis as a professor in the Department of Infectious Diseases and Microbiology. It's a wonderful institution. Back in 1947, when my father moved us all to Pittsburgh from Ann Arbor, where he'd been working on an influenza vaccine project, he was installed in a space in the municipal hospital, which had been the infectious diseases hospital for Pittsburgh. And he was located on as you face the building from the front entrance, it's now Salk Hall and changed in the way it looks. His quarters were on the left, starting in the basement, and then the first floor and animal facilities on the second floor. And the Graduate School of Public Health, which was founded in 1948, just right exactly at the time that he was getting himself going, was off to the right. So they were neighbors in that venture. My father was working with the School of Medicine at that point, but the University of Pittsburgh as a whole, the School of Medicine, its School of Public Health, it is just such a powerhouse in terms of all that has been contributed to medicine, to health over these many, many decades.
Oh, I know. We are so blessed in Pittsburgh to have the great health care and to be a part of a community that has all the research that's been done here and the things that have been developed, and they're working now on a vaccine. But let me just find out a little about your background. You went to Harvard undergrad and then to Johns Hopkins Medical School. Did you always want to be a doctor? Were you inspired by what your father did? Did that motivate you, or did you?
It's really interesting. I can think back to when we first came to Pittsburgh. My father set us up in a home in a really wonderful rural part of the community in Wexford, which at that point was just where we lived with a few houses along Route 19, Perry Highway, with fields and trees and butterflies and so on. It was just an absolutely wonderful place to live. And then we moved into the city, into Squirrel Hill in 1953, when things just heated up so much in terms of the polio vaccine research that my father just needed to be closer at hand. I remember being in the kitchen there and just having this awareness of, so at that point I would have been somewhere between, I don't know what, maybe 4 years old and 6 or so years old, and just recognizing that my father was a doctor, he was a physician, and people really respected him, and that sort of implanted in me the thought that, this I'd like to have that same, sort of relationship with people in the world. And then when I was 9, just before we moved into town, my father and I were sitting on a blanket in the sun, and he was talking in quite some detail about the work he was doing, and I just was really struck by the beauty and the clarity of all of his thinking, the graphs he showed me and the approach that he was taking. That really implanted in me the desire at some point in my life to work with him.
Well, I don't know how it's possible to have a better pedigree than to go to Harvard undergrad and medical school at Johns Hopkins, arguably one of the best medical schools in the world, and then to have a lineage, legacy, foundation named after your father, and you've got to be very fortunate to have had the career and the education that you've gotten, and you have obviously made the most of that, and I congratulate you for that. It's very impressive. Now,
thank you, Jim.
I'd like to ask.
I appreciate that. Go ahead.
I'd like to ask first, how does developing a vaccine today compare to when your father was working on the vaccine? Today we have computers and artificial intelligence and computers that run at light speed and are so advanced. And your father did not have the advantage of all of that. It was a very tedious and difficult challenge to develop a vaccine, and it took several years. Can you enlighten us a little about the differences?
Sure. Some things are still the same, and the bottom line of that is the need to be absolutely careful in what you do. Other things are quite different in terms of the resources, the kinds of approaches, what it takes to put a vaccine together. Back in those days, there were fundamentally only 2 approaches to making vaccines against a viral illness such as polio or influenza or the coronavirus, and that consisted of either killing the virus or inactivating it primarily chemically, or using a weakened version of the virus as a live virus vaccine. My father chose the first of those methods, to use formalin as a chemical, inactivation of the polio virus, and to do that, what he and his colleagues, and I have to emphasize that this was a team effort. There were many colleagues that worked with him who were just of such high quality that the team itself, as a whole, is what was responsible for the success of this effort. And they included Julie Youngner as one of the team members, who has a long association with the University of Pittsburgh before he died a few years ago. So one of the most important things was to be sure that the methods that they used to inactivate the virus could guarantee that there would be no residual live virus left in the vaccine preparation itself, that it would be completely safe. And they put a lot of effort into setting up a method by which that would be reproducible and secure. Dr. Albert Sabin worked on the other approach, which was to use a weakened version of the virus to make a live virus vaccine. So the first approach, the injected vaccine that was developed at the University of Pittsburgh, that came into use in 1955. And within 7 years of that time, the incidence of polio in this country, which had reached a peak of around 58,000 cases in 1952, dropped precipitously, so that at the end of 7 years, the incidence of polio had been reduced after the introduction of the vaccine by 97% compared to the 4 years before the vaccine was introduced. So that was just quite a successful undertaking.
Wow.
Dr. Sabin's oral vaccine, which was much more convenient to administer, and as far as kids were concerned, it would be so much more delightful to get your vaccine on a sugar cube than to have a needle poked in your arm. That was introduced in 1961, was the main, I won't go into a lot of the details, it was used here in this country primarily as the main vaccine in use for polio until the year 2000. The country went back to using the killed vaccine for reasons I could talk about.
Was there any sense of competition between your father and Dr. Sabin when they were both working on a vaccine and taking different routes?
Yeah, there was quite a difference of opinion in terms of which would be the better way to go, and the two men had quite different personalities. My father tended to be very even-keeled and balanced in his communications. Dr. Sabin tended to be, well, he was an extremely intelligent man. He had, I think, a great distaste for the killed vaccine approach and made that rather well known publicly.
And, another thing that came to my mind is that there are doctors today working on a vaccine for the COVID-19 all over the world. There are teams in Europe and in Asia, and certainly several teams around the country of really, really capable people that are working on these. And I assume that they're collaborating and exchanging information. None of that was possible back when your father and Dr. Sabin were working on polio, was it?
There was exchange of information. There would be conferences, and people would report on the work that was being done. All of the polio vaccine efforts, which were mainly those two, were coordinated and funded by the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, commonly known as the March of Dimes because of its fundraising program that had been set up by Franklin Roosevelt quite a number of years before.
Right. When I was born, Franklin Roosevelt had just taken office, and for the next many years he was elected 4 times, and so he was the only president that I knew, and that was the first that I ever heard of polio when people discussed the fact that he had that disease.
Right. He just was such a strong individual. He managed to overcome the paralysis. I mean, he never could physically overcome the paralysis, but you wouldn't know that there was anything that was holding this man back based on the way he carried and conducted himself.
No, when you consider that he became one of the most important men in the world and led the country that really was behind the winning of the Second World War.
Right.
That was pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
What is your feeling about how we approach the coronavirus and developing the vaccines? If you'll think about that for just a moment, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking to Dr. Peter Salk, who is president of the Jonas Salk Legacy Foundation. He is a doctor, a very successful and highly respected doctor with a connection to Pittsburgh, and of course his father developed the polio vaccine. This is Jim Roddey for St. Barnabas. We'll be right back in just a moment.
Are you still working on that retirement checklist?
I want to find the perfect place for us to live.
I want to golf.
I'm looking for lots of activities and lots of friendly people.
We need to find a place where security is a priority.
Top-notch medical services are important.
And we have to find a place that'll let us keep lucky.
Absolutely. Well, guess what? St. Barnabas has everything we're looking for, including free unlimited golf.
Let's arrange a tour.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Best of Allegheny County. We're talking to Dr. Peter Salk, and his father developed the polio vaccine, and we're talking to Dr. Salk about viruses today and the challenges of developing something for COVID-19. And we've already heard about some of the doctor's background and some of his early days with his father. Dr. Salk, you're a doctor. You've done research. You know about developing vaccines. Tell us about some of the challenges that they're going through now.
Well, let me start out by saying something about the approaches that are being used, and then remind me to come back to the challenges issue if I don't immediately. Whereas in the old days, there were those 2 main approaches that I talked about. There are so many possibilities nowadays. You have, in addition to live and killed viruses, you have genetic engineering, which allows you to transfer genes from the virus that you want to make a vaccine against into some other virus that won't hurt you. And that virus can infect the body, not be damaging at all, and deliver to the body the proteins that will be important to develop immunity against the virus that you're concerned with. You can use purified materials from the virus. You can make something called virus-like particles, which don't have any genetic material in them, so they can't be dangerous. There's just such a wide range of approaches. You can use the DNA or the RNA from the virus itself to create vaccines. There's a huge field out there, and right now there's something on the order of 78 different vaccine development programs in process.
Good grief! And there's a harvesting of plasma from patients of the coronavirus, and then transferring
that's another approach also, absolutely, to purify antibodies from their blood that would be against the coronavirus and try transferring those antibodies into to people to see whether that would help to get them over the hump if people are infected.
Well, it seems to me that people react differently to viruses, and they recover for different reasons, and you can't count on harvesting the plasma from all of them that recover. It's got to be a special case.
Yeah, there's a limit to what you can do in that regard. Actually, that was work that was undertaken at the Graduate School of Public Health back in the polio days by William Hammond, who was working on exactly that approach, harvesting what was called gamma globulin from people who'd had polio or who were immune to polio, and using that as a preventive. But you just can't go very far that way. You can only reach a limited number of people. It's not easy transferring that plasma. The injections back then were really quite uncomfortable. So a vaccine is really the way that one needs to go.
Well, you really need a vaccine, something that can be produced and manufactured in big quantities and transported.
Yes.
Plasma would be much more difficult and slow, and you would never be able to treat the numbers of people that we need to treat in the world.
No, that might be a stopgap method, but it's not what one needs ultimately.
And there was some talk about the quinine and the drugs used to treat malaria. That seems to have died down somewhat.
Well, it's still the jury's out about that. There are some small trials that have been completed, and they're mixed results. There are going to be some larger trials undertaken. So I think we really need to wait for a bit more before we know whether that's a promising route to pursue as far as treatment is concerned. And treatment, finding drugs that can kill the virus and prevent it from continuing to cause damage in a person that's infected, or perhaps even to prevent getting the infection to begin with if you've been exposed. That's a really valuable approach also.
Well, now the coronavirus is similar to it's a different form of a flu virus, and we know from experience that we developed vaccines for flu, and it had success. But each year, the flu seems to mutate and come back in a different form. Is that likely to happen with the COVID-19? Will we develop a vaccine that might be effective, but would have to be changed somewhat or modified for a mutation?
Yeah, that's just unknown at this point. At least it's unknown to me. The two viruses are different in some respects. Influenza has the ability to have very rapid mutations that result in its being able to escape the effects of a vaccine the following year because it's managed to change itself. Whether the coronavirus can do that or will do that is not a question that really is the answer is not there at this point.
Well, if you were the attending physician in a hospital in Pittsburgh and we're counseling people on what they should do, are you satisfied that the precautions that we're taking, the social distancing and the wearing of masks and the washing of hands and all of that, are there other things that we should be doing? Are there dietary things that we should think about? Or are there any kind of vitamin regimes that we should be considering?
Ultimately, what we need is a vaccine to make us really secure that we've got this under control. We need treatments for people who do get infected, but I just can't emphasize enough the importance at this moment in time of the social distancing. That has allowed us to put a lid on things for the moment, as long as we continue that, and only to back off of that in a very careful and measured fashion as the caseload diminishes, as the hospitals move out of the risk of being overwhelmed, when we have the appropriate testing, both in terms of who is currently infected, even if you're not showing symptoms, and who has already been infected and they may have recovered or not even known that they were sick and have antibodies in their blood, having the ability to have enough people to trace contact. So if someone does come down with the illness, who have they been in contact with, get them quarantined and tested and so on. We really need to use all the tools at our disposal. And right now, this social distancing, the ability to develop tracking and testing, those are the key things for us at this point until we have the security of a vaccine.
Well, in the United States, we have a very difficult challenge in that governors have a great deal of power, and they are political animals, not medical doctors. And there's a great deal of pressure to open businesses and to